Today we're reviewing a prequel comic for Batman Arkham Asylum. We'll go over the dynamics behind this comic and its quality before I talk a little bit about my ongoing series, Random Reviews, The Joker. But before we get into all of that, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more comic book reviews. Random Reviews has been a fun little experiment we've done a few times now. First the Detective Comics series, then for Mary Jane, and now for Joker, with us about halfway through the 10 planned reviews for comics featuring the Joker. What I like about doing these is it gives us a fun grab bag of different things featuring different characters. And for the Joker, that's included, so far, one Silver Age comic, Harley Quinn's first ever solo comic, a freaking masterpiece of a Justice League story, a classic comic that is so old it pretty much precludes the Golden Age, a wild modern crossover with a character older than Batman, and now this, a prequel comic to a video game that came out a very long time ago. That game, Batman Arkham Asylum, for those of you living under a rock I guess, in turn spawned many video games, including 2 proper sequels and a handful of spin-offs, including a full-fledged prequel. To say Arkham Asylum was influential is a huge understatement. But the first true prequel to Arkham Asylum, in fact the first ever publication and glimpse of this new Batman franchise, was this comic we're reviewing today, and I think that's pretty cool. I'm not going to pretend that this comic is some sort of masterpiece or so full of content it really impresses me all that much on its own. But where it succeeds well and how it does really impress me is the way the writer and artist, Alan Burnett and Carlos Dana, respectively, managed to put together something, really managed to put me back in that mindset of me first playing that Arkham game when it initially came out. The final moments of this comic take you so effectively into the first moments of a video game that it was very easy to edit those scenes from the game into our earlier recap of this comic. I didn't really plan that out, it's just something I noticed could easily be done while editing the video, and it was very effective thanks to how strong the work was done by these creators. For a short little video game tie-in comic book, they did a really good job with this thing. They didn't cover everything, like I don't believe I caught any mention of the influx of Blackgate prisoners into Arkham Asylum, a major plot point of the actual game, but they definitely set up some of the more memorable and important moments, like the use of Venom to empower people, the initial conflict with Zsasz, or the production of a new fear toxin by the Scarecrow. This comic has a good, healthy dose of setup, which is great for a book that is transparently advertised as such, especially knowing that that setup is fully paid off in a well-made video game that would go on to change the video game industry forever, effectively setting up a new gold standard for games that blended combat and stealth mechanics, whereas most previous games that tried to do something like that tended to lean in terms of quality in one direction over the other. You could have a good stealth game with lousy combat mechanics, or a good combat game with lousy stealth mechanics, but Arkham Asylum was the first real popular game that had both. It led to not only it affecting a huge other series of games, but a series of games based on the Arkham brand all onto their own, with the only real flaw most everyone can agree on to these games on a certain level is that the Arkham series was always obsessed with Joker. Many have criticized that to say that Joker is used in these games to a catastrophic fault and can never seem to escape that problem. Not in Arkham Origins, which was supposed to be all about the Black Mask or at a bare minimum Bane, but instead became all about the Joker. Nor in Arkham Knight, during which the Joker is dead the entire time, yet somehow is still a main character, but also it was used in a very interesting way throughout the entire game, in a way that I've never really seen before, and I'm kind of glad they went for it. For better or worse, and I might even go so far as to say it was for the best, the Arkham series feels like it is so much more about the Joker than it is about Batman, given how neutral and passive Batman is in these games outside of player control. With all that in mind, given that we're doing a series of reviews about the Joker, it felt cool and right that we ended up with a comic related to the Arkham series. That's the fun part about this series of random reviews. You never know what you're going to get, and given we're about halfway through our Joker reviews, I thought it would be nice to maybe look over these comics that we've covered so far a bit to check out how the Joker is used in each of them. I've touched on this matter with some of these reviews, but also deliberately kind of left it aside with others. Some of those stories were too good to not make those reviews stand on their own just fine, and sometimes we have a bit more pressing things to talk about when it comes to these comics, like the mere existence of the Shadow requiring quite a bit of discussion all on its own, while Rock of Ages is one of my favorite Justice League stories ever, so there's quite a bit to talk about there beyond the Joker simply appearing in that story. But I think it's worth doing this, as we can all learn a little bit about how DC has used the Joker over the years. They actually used him quite a bit early on in Batman history, but by the time we got around to the Golden and Silver Age, he was pretty much a regular villain, not used much more than any other standard enemy in Batman's Rogues Gallery. It's only around the 90s that things really start to ramp up. Indeed, I noticed something really cool when I was putting together this massive list of every comic the Joker has appeared in. By my best estimate, from 1939 to 1989, the Joker appeared in about 300 to 400 comics at most, and even then I'm being pretty generous. From 1990 to the present day, exactly half the amount of time since the Joker had originally been introduced, that number has exploded to a little over 1,600 unique books by my best and most conservative estimate. And that change does not match some transformation of character. The slow change from a classic gag-themed villain that the Joker was into the scary and violent psychopath that he now is, which occurred around the end of the Silver Age in the late 70s and early 90s, does not match the explosion in popularity of the Joker appearing in comic after comic. Rather, what it does match is it really follows right around the premiere of the Batman 1989 film. I think that movie might be the single most important story in all of Joker history in terms of this character's popularity. It created a sort of feedback loop, which only increased in the 90s when the Joker became a standout character in the Batman animated series. Mark Hamill's take on the character essentially cemented a tradition where he became the most popular Batman villain and indeed the most popular superhero villain of them all. And because of that, he started appearing in more and more adaptations. And those adaptations became so good that they informed him appearing in more and more comics. That's created a great deal of attention for this character, with special mini-series devoted entirely to him showing up in more and more stories beyond Batman himself, like in Nightwing or other characters' comics. And by the time we get to the modern day, where the Joker has incredibly, as a character, won 2 Academy Awards for 2 different actors, a feat that very well might never be replicated by another comic book character ever, it's very easy to see why the majority of these comics we're going to be talking about in this series were published after 1990. That's not an accident. It's very much a byproduct of how this character was treated, and all of that was done for a good reason. Inevitably, the widespread popularity of the character has led to some backlash, but on the other hand, it hasn't really slowed down DC either. I could tell you the rate at which Joker has appeared in comics has decreased to a more manageable level, but I'd be lying. Everything I've seen suggests the opposite. It has only increased over time as the Joker finds himself entangled in plot after plot and special after special. It should be noted that I'm just sort of stating a fact there, and my opinion of that trend is a bit more neutral. Certainly I agree that overusing the character will lead to people getting sick of him if they aren't already. I have been sick of the character in the past, and the biggest example I can think of remains Arkham Origins, where his headlining presence was unwelcome and unwanted. But I also have a great deal of trouble fully objecting to his continued heavy presence in DC media. I keep circling back to that stuff I said earlier. This villain wins awards, stars in his own movies, and changes how the world thinks of comic books. I really, truly don't understand why I should stand in the way of that, or object to it. But I can't pretend that diminishing returns isn't a thing either. I guess part of the reason that I don't feel sick of the Joker at present is that he has been used very creatively these days. His teaming up with Batman in Dark Knight's Metal, him being shown in an entirely new light in White Knight, the Joker movie being quite interesting on the whole, and though it is quite old now, I still think about that clever use of his character in Arkham Knight all the time. If they keep consistently using this guy in new and interesting ways, well then I'm not going to be getting sick of this villain anytime soon. But there are limits. Let's not forget the Jared Leto side of the equation, where the Joker starts showing up needlessly in stories just so they can use him in marketing, as has happened quite a few times now. Or worse, they try and do something different for the character, but it has the subtlety of somebody bashing you over the head with a baseball bat. So here's a question for you all. If Batman were to use a baseball bat, would it be called the Bat Baseball Bat? We'll be answering these questions and more as we continue on with our random reviews of comics featuring the Joker here on Comic Island. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.